essay that I've wanted to read out loud, but have never had the opportunity. I feel like this is maybe my only chance. And so this is How to Work a Locker Room. Don't look down. Look up instead to the tops of the lockers, because that's where you'll find the players' names. The starters have theirs engraved on Formica blocks. The scrubs, just up from minor league, have pieces of tape marked with block letters in ballpoint. Don't talk to the stars, the high scorers, the French-Canadian goalies, the Eastern European wingers, or any rookie with a multi-million-dollar signing bonus. No one governs their behavior. No one reprimands them. No one even warns them. And on some days, who knows when, cruelty becomes sport. Talk to the captain, because he has to be nice to reporters. Talk to the goon, the guy hired for his fists, the guy whose job it is to beat opposing players while thousands cheer. Because goons are plain spoken and often funny. Nobody knows why, but they are. Perhaps human nature compels them to wrap an ugly skill in a charming package. And talk to the guy who went to Harvard. There's one on every team. These guys are never big stars, but they give nice long answers, philosophical answers, in which most of the nouns and verbs agree. Those quotes can be handy if the story runs short. Don't tell anyone that you don't know anything about hockey, that you've never sat through an entire game, that you don't know any of the players' names, or that you had to call for directions to the practice facility. Act like you've been here before. The beat writers who are here every day have it down. They sigh heavily while gazing into the middle distance. They keep their coats on and check their watches frequently, as though they're late for an important meeting. They cultivate tics of boredom, tapping their notebooks against an open palm, rolling their shoulders to get at some ancient kink. They nod briskly to each other and say, "How's it going?" Nobody ever answers this question. Don't flinch at the smell, or the media guy will smirk at you and know you for what you are, a girl on an assignment that nobody else wanted, a girl who might need babysitting. And then he will say, "You have to walk up to them, you know. They're never going to walk up to you." It is important to hide any searing disdain for the media guy as you thank him for his inane advice. The stench is not just the body odor of 30 men trapped in an airless, windowless cave. Sweaty men with bad diets have been undressing in this room for decades. The sour molecules have seeped into the fluorescent lighting above, into the wooden stalls that serve as lockers, and into the tattered industrial carpeting below. Steam pours into the room from an open-air shower at one end of the room. A half-dozen shower heads run in a constant low hiss, and as a result, even the paint on the walls has acquired a sheen. And yet no one notices the heat, the clammy air, or the closeness of too many bodies. Practice deference always. Remember that the lowliest man in this room makes $5,000 a week. Name players earn 10 times that. This week, for this story, you will make $350. Know when you've been sent on a fool's errand, when you've been asked to interview a professional hockey player about the years of sexual abuse he suffered while playing junior league hockey in Canada. The player, who was 14 at the time the abuse started, endured it, along with years away from his family, years out of formal schooling, and years on a punishing road schedule of games, because playing junior hockey was his only chance to become a pro. 6 months ago, the player turned in his former coach, pressed charges, and aided prosecutors through the trial and conviction. It is the biggest story a young reporter could ever hope to cover. The trouble is that the story broke a month ago. It has been smothered by every major news outlet. Everyone has already done this story. Say this to the assigning producer and he will respond, "We haven't done it." And when you ask, "What if the player refuses to talk?" he will say, "Do your best." By the time players trudge into the locker room, they've already removed their gloves, their helmets, and their skates. They scratch their sweaty heads with red and swollen hands and pad around on bare feet. Someone will tell you later that hockey players never wear socks. They wear skates that are 2 sizes smaller than their street shoes. Their skates are molded so tightly to their feet that the seams leave long indentations in the skin. Some have little red circles marking the eye holes of the laces. Ignore the media guy when he says, Sheldon isn't doing interviews anymore. About that. Wait until he walks away and then turn your 60-watt smile on the nearest, least naked scrub and ask, which one is Sheldon? Walk up to Sheldon and say his name gently, because your heart is pounding in your ears. And when he turns, hesitant, say quietly, do you have a minute? Use time wisely. Luckily, the players wear a lot of equipment. Before he can shower, each player must tug off his sodden nylon jersey and drop it on the floor at his feet. An old man pushing a cart through the room will pick it up later. The player then peels off his elbow pads before sitting down to work the shin guards off. Then he unlaces and shrugs off his shoulder pads. Then he stands and unbuckles his pants, which kind of look like knickers, except that they're filled with padding to protect the kidneys, thighs, and tailbone. Under this, a player will wear compression pants, really a nylon girdle that keeps his thigh muscles warm between shifts. The older guys wear jock straps under their compression pants. And by this point, you'd better be done with your questions. Because there really is no nice, carefree way to interview a bored 22-year-old millionaire who is naked. Ignore the media guy again. When he runs at you shouting, "No, I told you no," so loudly that everyone turns to look. Turn pleadingly to Sheldon and wait for the nod. You don't have to, the media guy says to him. No, it's okay, says Sheldon. Thank him silently. Trail Sheldon across the room while the players do what they do. They fart, gossip, tell jokes, whip each other with wet towels, make golf plans while buttoning their flannel shirts and tucking them into their jeans. Sheldon, who is down to his compression pants and shower shoes, walks to a laundry bin and rifles through it. He picks out a ragged olive t-shirt, maybe his, and pulls it over his head. You wait. Is there going to be an interview or not? Come on, he says, and leads you out of the locker room toward the ice. At ringside, he gestures to the bottom row of stands, and you both sit. Thank him again while you paw through the bag holding the Marantz recorder and microphone, your notebook scribbled through with notes on other sports you know little about, from other awkward interviews with other athletes, less famous, less wealthy, but less intimidating too. Fumble for the record button while he waits. Lift the headphones to your ear and check for sound while he waits. Formulate a likely first question while he waits. Know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to walk him up the ladder of pain, like all the talk show hosts do. It seems so easy. When did he first molest you? What happened and how do you feel about that? The producer of the evening drive time news wants details, especially about how hard it must be for him to get on in that tough hockey culture. Be sure to ask him how the other players treat him now, said the producer. And then he said, I imagine a cone of silence around him. In the weeks following the coach's conviction, Sheldon Kennedy's cone of silence has included interviews with hundreds of reporters who have followed him to and from the rink, to and from the shower, to and from his car. Every day he receives several letters from men who were themselves molested as children. He carries these letters in a separate suitcase on the road. He says he intends to answer them all. And then he says he wants to start a charity for abused kids. Each one of these revelations sets off a new round of stories. Sheldon stares at the floor, at the space of concrete between his feet. A likely first question seems to be, how are you doing? Okay, he says, still looking down. A likely next question seems to be, do you have a therapist? Here he flashes a gaze at you. Yeah, he says. You know, a guy I can call twice a week. I go see him after the season is over. Strangle the urge to say, that's no good. Instead, nod enthusiastically and say, good, great. What you really want to know is how. Not how did he survive. Amateur psychologists ask that. Survival is actually a kind of inertia. Sometimes adolescence is a controlled fall down a steep hill. You tuck and you roll. And the question of survival is pertinent really once you reach the bottom of the hill and find that whole chunks of your character have been scraped away. Stuff you might need later to make friends and love someone. That's where Sheldon sits. At the bottom of that hill, in the middle of a career that's not turning out the way he'd like, he has been lit by the kind of media glare unheard of even in sports celebrity, his name linked inextricably to the worst thing that's ever happened to him. And here he sits on a bench in a chilled arena and hunches his back to make himself smaller. He trembles, he smells of smoke. He rocks and works the muscles on his forearms. You want to shake him and say, I know. I know your food tastes like mud. I know why you drink. I know you wake up every morning with a headache because you've been gritting your teeth in your sleep. You want to shake him and demand to know, how are you planning to survive this year? But nobody wants to hear the answer to that question. You want to ask, how did you do it? How did you walk into a police station and turn him in? How did you sit through the police interviews? How did you face the coach in court when he said, I didn't do anything? And then when he said, I was in love? That's what they all say. They say, I didn't do it. And then they say, I couldn't help it. Or sometimes they say, you made me. How can you listen to that and not collapse? Only certain people would want the answer to that question. What you ask instead is how. How is your wife dealing with all of this? That brings his head up. My wife, he says. He seems annoyed. Scramble and improvise. Some people, you say, some people say that, telling a spouse is the hardest part. He nods at the floor, and then it's safe to watch him while he talks. She was the first person I told, he says, and then he talks fast, too fast, about that night and how she listened and how she understood and how she encouraged him to come forward. Ignore the pang of emotion this confession raises. Check the needle on the recorder. Hold the microphone close enough to his face to get clear sound. This is good. You can use this. Never mind that it is truly touching, truly private, and as such is a kind of violation. That's the deal, trading privacy for fame. You know this, and so does he, doesn't he? Don't talk about yourself. Remember what these guys do. Professional athletes collect cars, watches, wives, addictions, stockbrokers, and mischief. They have depth at the nanny position. They have depth at the girlfriend position. They don't care about your childhood, your ambitions, how hard it is to be you, so shut up about all of it. You're not here to make friends. On the other side of the arena, a Zamboni fires up. The engine roars and the needle on your aging Marantz recorder pegs accordingly. Sheldon keeps talking about his wife, his decision to step forward, his struggle with the image of a tough hockey player against the reality of being an abused kid. Every bit of it has been drowned out by the Zamboni as it spreads a thin layer of water over the ice, covering the blade marks in preparation for an afternoon's skating lessons or high school hockey practices. Let him talk anyway. Don't face him. These questions are too intimate. They are more intimate than even he knows. Direct your questions to the ice and let him study your face while you talk, and then look at him while he answers. He has learned already not to look at people when he talks about his past. Too often, they show their shock and disgust. He looks at the floor, at that same piece of concrete between his shower shoes, or he looks toward the ice, now glassy and smooth and exhaling steam as the new layer of moisture dries. The conversation takes on a rhythm, with each of you looking at the other without being seen. He can flinch at the questions if he wants, without feeling shame, and you can flinch at the answers. Don't talk too long, or there won't be anyone left in the locker room to interview. Your last question is about his daughter. Will he tell her? Here comes a sad smile. He talks about taking her on long drives into the country and about how she is the only person to whom he can confess everything that was done to him and every irrational fear about his own insanity. She's only 5 months old, he says. She can't judge me. Wonder at the two halves of your brain working at once. One side says, don't use this, it's too personal. And the other side says, use this at all costs, it's so personal. Shake his hand at the end and say again, thank you for your time. You listened, he said. Most of them don't. Nod sagely, let him walk to the locker room alone, and then follow. Interview the captain, who is nice because he has to be, and the goon, who is wide-eyed with admiration for Sheldon's bravery. The Harvard guy has already gone home. Go home and cry as you log tape and as you write. Hate the story, but turn it in anyway. Feel dismay when others say they love it, especially the quote about the baby. Afterward, when another sports writer asks about the interview, confess that you wanted to soothe Sheldon and offer advice but held back. Listen to this writer when he says, good, that's not your job. He means it's not professional to offer comfort, not in a newsroom and certainly not in a locker room. At some point, every reporter wishes to shed the role of public informant, to become a person, to be recognized as caring or interesting individual to one of these men. And remember that individuals do not get invited into locker rooms. Individuals do not get paid to ask personal questions of celebrities. Only reporters do. A month later, accept another assignment to report on the team's historic losing streak. Go back to that same stinky room filled with the same sweaty guys. Ask stupid questions like, how does it feel to lose 13 games in a row? How do you think the fans feel? Are you guys going to be able to turn this around? Ignore Sheldon. It's the least you can do. Finally, he has stopped giving interviews. He laughs and jokes and sets tee times, even though his stats are horrible. His ice time has dwindled. He has a towel wrapped around his waist when he walks by you, and then he turns, pointing one index finger. He squints as he looks at your face. You interviewed me, he says. Say yes. Thank you, I appreciated that. Don't say, everyone in North America interviewed you. Don't say that. Accept his outstretched hand and shake it. I remember you, he says. Mumble something nonsensical about your assignment. Feel fully the urge to say more. Thank him again for his time and don't watch him walk away. Forget the dreams in which you hug him and tell him he's going to be okay. Suppress the daydreams in which you admonish him not to try to be the perfect victim, in which you insist that he fire that stupid long-distance therapist and hire somebody real. Tell yourself over and over again to stop thinking about him. Later, accept another assignment about the team's now historic plunge to the very bottom of the NHL standings. Dead last place, you are told to ask. How does that feel? And so you find yourself in front of the Harvard guy who is wearing only a jockstrap saying, do you think the fans are frustrated? The look on his face suggests that he could punch you. Wander back out to the arena where the coach lines up pucks to shoot them into the net. Everyone knows he will be fired tomorrow after the final game of the season. He seems relieved. Walk past Sheldon, who is standing outside the ice, still wearing all his gear. He holds his hockey stick upright like a staff and chats with someone in the stands. Still, he turns to you when you pass. I know you, he says. Say yes to him. You interviewed me, he says. Say yes again, stupidly. Say, thank you, I appreciate it. And then ask, how are you? Okay, he says, and his gaze flicks away and then back. Next month, he will be traded away. He will return to Canada and to the minor leagues until an injury ends his career. In Canada, he will launch a national campaign to raise money for other survivors of sexual abuse, and then he will take a regular job and sequester himself away from reporters like you. He tucks his right glove under his left arm, removes his hand, and extends it. Take it. Feel the heat and the sweat in his palm. Know that this is the moment you will regret forever. This is the moment to say, I know about this, and you're going to be okay. One day you will smile and trade small talk, and it won't seem like everyone else lives at the other end of a long tube. This is the chance to say, forgive yourself for attracting his notice. Forgive yourself for your complicit acts, for your own dogged silence. It's the only way. Don't say anything like that. Don't say any of the caring things that decent people say after a shared confidence. Don't even say something meaningless like, hang in there. Smile coolly instead, and say the only thing a reporter ever says to an athlete after an interview. Say, thank you for your time.